Okay, so before I put it back in, here's a look at the oil pump drive shaft that goes in here, and that seal that goes bad that leaks down the back of the block. And for this engine, I'll do another video when I have the heads on to show how close it is. You can't really get to this with the heads on, or at least the rear one. So this is the O-ring that went bad. It's hard as a rock, so the oil just seeps around it and out onto the top of the block. And these two parts are separate, so it looks like the drive shaft should still be able to work if you put some gasket maker along this top edge here and along maybe that perimeter. So I'm going to do that, and I just thought I'd do a quick video. Some quick tips about the alternator with this engine. If you haven't ever had to change one, you might still already know its location is kind of annoying, and changing it is kind of a pain for two reasons. The first is, well, to get it out, since I have my heads off, you can remove the alternator through here, just push the power steering lines out of the way and stuff, and you can finagle it out. But if you don't have the heads off, your only option is either removing the axle or the tie rod and taking it out through the fender. But in my case, since I had the heads off and I could get it out, I went ahead and replaced it because this heating duct was off, or cooling duct rather, and I just didn't want it to go out later and have to deal with that. So just make sure this is some kind of cooling duct or something. Make sure it's connected though. The alternator probably gets pretty hot back there right under the exhaust manifold behind the engine, so it needs all the help it can get. And I also changed this wire. It used to run this way, and you can see it sitting under the exhaust manifold. It looks like it got pretty hot, so hopefully it'll stay cooler, ran a little bit further away from it. And make sure you get the duct on. And the other reason that it sucks to get out is this bottom bolt. I left it disconnected so you could see. I ground away a little bit of my frame to get it out, but if you don't, what happens is this bolt is really long, so you got to take it out, and it's all fine until you get to the frame, and then it just stops because that bolt is in front of the frame, and you can't get it out because even fully extended against the frame, you're not even to the threads of the bolt. So what you have to do is, I think the service recommendation would be to drop the subframe or the cradle. You have to drop the engine down about 1/2 of an inch, or probably more than that, maybe 3/4 of an inch, to get that bolt out through the fender. Instead, what I did is, I don't know if you can see, I drilled out a little U shape around the bolt, not drilled, ground out, so that I could get it out. Now in hindsight, it probably would have been easier to just drop the subframe, but it's done now. I won't have to worry about it in the future. But if you do this method, make sure you coat the bare metal, either paint it, put something greasy on it so it doesn't rust like crazy. But now that I cut that out of the frame, try and do this so I can see, here we go. You can take the bolt and kind of wiggle it out through that cutout and actually get the bolt out, which is nice. So yeah, there's that. So if you happen to have the heads off like me, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and change the alternator, especially if that cooling duct is not connected. Okay, so there's the cutout in the frame, and you can see the bolt kind of hanging out in there. That little U shape is what I ground out of the frame. It took a while, but at least it's done now, and I can get the bolt in and out. Would have been nice if GM just, incorporated that into the frame so you could change the alternator on this engine. But also for the alternator, don't forget this little guy. It's like a torque spacer. It goes on this bottom bolt behind this aluminum timing housing bracket, and it's basically, it goes in there so that when you tighten the bolt down, it pushes the front of the timing bracket onto this and then tightens onto that, instead of the timing bracket just bending in as you tighten the bolt. So if this drops, down onto there and you don't know what it's for. It's for that bottom alternator bolt. Now that I have the rear head off, you can see the clearance issues for this oil pump drive shaft. I mean, you might be able to grind some of the bottom of the head off. I mean, that'd probably be pretty doable, but still, I mean, as long as that shaft is, the best you're going to do is maybe get it up a little bit and cut off the old O-ring or something, maybe put some gasket maker around it. But yeah, that's the clearance issue. I'm not sure why the head's so close. I'm guessing since it's a recycled block from the other V6 engines, and these heads are quite a bit wider. And something else, just a quick little tip, these pins that go in the bottom two bolt holes for the block, don't forget those like I did, because it's a pain to reference the head gasket and the head and keep it straight. And I went ahead and got it on. I didn't realize that I had enough. Kind of a brain fart. So yeah, save yourself some time and don't go ahead and put it back together, because if your head gasket or head ends up being off a little bit, that could be a pretty big deal. So yeah, make sure you take those pins back out, and I just used a pair of pliers and like wiggled them and they came out pretty easily. So yeah, make sure you have those. They're very helpful and time saving. Okay, so here's the rear cam carrier. You can see I have the lifters in it too for now. So this part's really tricky. The lifters are kind of just free hanging. They just sit in their channels under there, and this obviously has to go upside down on top of the engine on the back of the head. So you have the issue of, I mean, if you pull the engine, sure, you could flip the engine upside down and stick these in, or I'm sure the proper way to do it would be to pull the cams out and torque this onto the back of the heads first and then drop the lifters in and then put the cams over the lifters. But if you're doing it like me, this is what I thought up of. I haven't tried it yet. I hope it works. It's just wax paper and some string around each set of lifters, and I'm hoping it works. It seems to hold them when I flip it upside down. My only issue is hopefully it doesn't tear and I can get it out. So yeah, that's what I did. I'm not sure if there's maybe a better method out there. Okay, well, that obviously did work. I got the rear one on now. Next is the front one. So the paper stuff, I just cut the strings, and then I had to have somebody come out and help me relieve some pressure, just gently lift up on the two sides to wiggle it out, because with the full weight of this thing and the two cams in it and the lifters sitting on that paper, it started to tear. So I mean, it kind of works, but really it's the only option you have other than, you know, taking the engine out and flipping it upside down to keep those lifters in. There it is. There we go. Kind of hard to see. Okay, this is going to be the more in-depth and proper way to set the timing on one of these engines. So before I start, just make sure you know that if you are only changing your timing belt and the belt has not broken, the engine runs fine, it hasn't slipped, you should check my other video for the shortcut method. It's much faster, much easier, and it requires no special tools. But having said that, if you have pulled the heads, or you want to alter your timing and not go the stock factory timing, or the belt has broken or slipped, or you suspect that may be an issue, those are the reasons that you would want to do this. And so having said that, here is the more complicated and the way that the factory recommends you set the timing when you're doing a timing belt change, or, you know, rebuilding the engine, etc. And I'm also going to cover how to alter the timing, or at least the method that I'm going to use. I'm not sure if there's a better one out there, but pretty sure mine will work decently well. as far as tools go, you will need at least these little guys. These cam flat holders, you could get away with just one, but two is convenient. And this for loosening the bolt that holds the camshaft to the sprocket. Don't try and use this to hold it. It won't. It'll probably break something, or if it doesn't break something, it'll twist and you won't be able to set it anyway. It'll flex or something. And you can get these kits for pretty cheap now, since this engine's pretty outdated. I got this one on eBay for just over $100, I think, from Kent Moore. But you can get the individual parts too. Your choice. Some tools seem pretty neat. The valve spring compressor is completely useless though. So, alright, that's the tools, and on to the procedure. Okay, so the first step assembly is obviously, if you're just changing the timing belt, you don't have to disassemble your engine this far, so don't freak out. With doing my head work, I had it torn down to the bare block. So the first step is getting down to the belt, getting the old belt off, and that requires, I don't remember exactly, but obviously the coolant overflow tank has to come out, this brace that goes to the shock tower, all of the timing covers, the two top ones and the side one, the power steering pump for convenience. I mean, don't even try leaving that on. I think the pulley's in the way anyway. And you also need to take the tensioner for your accessory belt off, or you'll break that plastic timing belt cover getting it off. And then once you get down to it, you need to take out, I mean, if you're setting it this way, you don't need to mark anything or worry about the previous timing. It doesn't really matter. I'd recommend you set it to top dead center, but it's not completely necessary. So take out the two idler pulleys and the tensioner and its associated pulley, and then get the belt out and clean everything out as well as you can. The debris and the old timing belt strings and fragments and stuff, and you should be good to go. And you also will have to take the valve covers off, because you have to get to these flats, and I'll show that next. For the next step, I'd recommend loosening these retaining bolts for the cam cogs so that those spin freely before you have the new belt on. So this is the tool and how it works. It's a 1/2 inch drive here, and then I'm using a 1/2 inch drive, 15mm. The socket is a 15, and then it just goes like that, and you pull against the two. It's probably going to be pretty tight, somewhere around I think 96 foot-pounds. So you might need a steel bar or something on there for some extra leverage. And once you have all four of those broken loose, the rear one's going to be fun to get to. Then go ahead and install the tensioner hardware and all of its stuff, and I'll cover that next. The idler pulleys, and then get the belt on and make sure that the tensioner's engaged. I'll cover that next. So yeah, loosen those, and here's the cam flat holding tool. And this is how you use it if you're setting stock timing. You just, come on, you just get the cam flats close to up, and then you just snug that down, making sure not to exceed that, and it'll hold it for you, not against any torque, but it'll hold the cams in place. And that's stock timing, or flat timing. To get the tensioner ready, you first pop out the two plugs. There's this little rubber plug at the end, and then there's this little guy on top. This one's pretty easy to get out with a nail or something that goes in the end, but this one on top, good luck. Just use like a needle or a pin or a paper clip or something. And then once you get those out, you'll need a small screwdriver. I had to modify this one a little bit so that it can fit in here like that, because it's got to get to that. That is how you spin the spring down, or the tensioner down against the spring. And then you'll also need a paper clip, a smaller one, because the paper clip goes in that hole once you spin the tensioner down to hold it. Okay, so here it is compressed, and it wasn't that hard. The screwdriver, if you have a big enough handle, the spring turns down pretty easily, and this doesn't engage until I'd say about all the way compressed, and then let it come back about maybe a half turn or so. And you just slide the paper clip through there and then let it go. It'll hold itself. And you should add some oil too. I used this paper clip, just dipped it in some good synthetic oil and then just let it drip down the other paper clip into there. And I saw a little bit of a puddle in the bottom, so I stopped. Yeah, add some oil, use a screwdriver to turn that down, and then hold it in place with the paper clip. That's pretty much it. I think I covered it in my other video, but just making sure. Oh boy, look at that. This is the proprietary tool from Kent fucking Moore that was supposed to hold the cam cogs in place while you loosen them and then retorque them to 96 foot-pounds. It goes in like this, and then you put a 1/2-inch drive ratchet or breaker bar in here, supposedly. Problem is, well, as you can see, it's made out of the cheapest, softest, shittiest metal they could find, and nothing is reinforced around here. So the first 2 times I used it, it dug in and stuck, made little indents, which wasn't a huge deal, but I mean, I have to use it. It's the only thing I have, so... And it's kind of proprietary for this engine, so I kept going, and then the third one, it just slipped about 1/3 of a turn, so I stopped and repositioned it 90 degrees, tried again, and then it just had a blowout. This toolkit's a joke. I guess you're kind of screwed though, since they don't make these engines anymore, and the proprietary tools to use for the engine do not work. So just a warning to everybody, if you're putting this engine in a Fiero, or if you still have one and you're planning on changing the timing belt, hopefully you don't want to alter the timing. I'm kind of screwed because I got the 3rd cog loose out of 4, so I can't really go back and use it now. I've got to find a way of making this work. I'm thinking I'll just put a pipe wrench around it, but yeah. If you've got a Fiero, maybe get one of these and weld a breaker bar into it, or just have a machine shop make your own tools, because this crap is pretty much useless. Well, luckily I had somebody at work, a coworker, thanks so much Troy, that could fix my junk tool. He basically took a large washer and welded it in there around the outside perimeter, and then filled in the back that was, well, just bent out from where I used it, and then he wire EDM'd out the 1/2-inch square, and it works really well. Got those last 2 bolts out, and so just a warning, if you still have this engine, these tools are necessary. You need to have them to set the timing, but they're junk, so unless you have a welder and are willing to do this, I'd recommend not altering your timing. Just leave it factory and go with my shorter method, because this is a real pain in the butt. But I finally got it. So this thing works now after being modified, which is how it should have come. But moving on from that, so got those off, and then once you get those bolts out with your junk tool, these taper rings go on here, and they're not that hard to get off. They are pressed from that bolt, but what I did is I just got a big pry bar and just got behind them and just applied some pressure on one side and the other side, and just keep going back and forth and wiggle it, and it'll break free eventually. There's also a tool meant to do this in that Kent Moore kit, but not really too trusting of their tooling now, so I'm going to stick to a bare minimum. But yeah, I got those off, and this is how they should be. So the cams are not moving, but the cog is free spinning. So now just put the tapers and bolts back in, just finger tight, make sure they can still free spin. I'm going to put all the hardware in. That'll be the next step. Okay, after you've loosened all 4 of these and verified that they're free spinning, then next go ahead and put these 2 idler pulleys in and torque them to 37 foot-pounds, and then put this back pulley in that's a tensioner, and put these 2 in and then feed the timing belt around everything and try and make it to where you pull all of your slack down to back here. And then next put this in and then go ahead and torque that also. And then once you do that, it's use a 3/8 open end wrench for, let's see if I can get the light right here, for this part, and basically you just put it on here, and that allows you to tension the timing belt, because what happens is this will be pointing kind of down and you can't quite fit the tensioner in, because the rounded part where the tensioner goes into is up and you need it to be down a little bit. So basically feed the tensioner in, just get it in place back there, but you won't be able to seat it, and then take the wrench and pry that up and pull as much slack off the belt as you can until you can get the front of that tensioner ball ram thing onto the back of the tensioner pulley, I guess. And then once you have that, then feed the tensioner into its little tapered channel, and then it should stay in place. And then once you have that, you're home free. And you can see the paper clip, bend it up like that, if you can see it. But anyways, so just have the paper clip to where it comes out. Zoom back out. Have it come out and then turn pretty quick and then turn back up like an S, so that you can get it out. And there it is, so that you can get like a long pair of pliers or something onto it and yank it out. And that's what I'm going to do next after you get that plate in front of the tensioner and the 2 bolts that hold it on. And I believe those call for 18 foot-pounds of torque. And it's this little guy that goes in front of their tensioner. And that's next. Okay, I've got everything in and torqued. Last step is to remove the paper clip that's holding the tensioner. See if I can do the camera and this at the same time. Alright, I think I'm on it. There we go. There's how I bent it. Paper clip's out, so the tensioner is loose. Not loose, but it's unrestrained. And that should be it. Belt should be taut now. Make sure your plugs are removed, and with these still loose, spin the engine over a couple times. I think it calls for at least 3, just to make sure that the belt is seated and everything. And then after that, it's on to actually setting the timing, now that the belt is in and tensioned and ready to go. Just a note about spinning the engine over: always rotate it clockwise, the direction that it normally spins in, which is, let me show you, and it's a 15 millimeter for that central crankshaft bolt to spin the engine over with. And don't try and spin it over by anything but the crankshaft. Yeah, clockwise, the direction you should be spinning it. And then you can hear the compression blowing past the spark plugs since they're removed. And if it gets tight, I noticed as I was spinning, it started to get hard to turn, and one of these crankshaft taper bolts snugged itself up. Yeah, I think that happened again. This front one keeps snugging, so if it gets hard to turn, just loosen that bolt again, and then you could back it off. You're supposed to have them finger tight, but you could back it off like a quarter turn so that it doesn't keep tightening itself. But yeah, there's that. Spin it over at least 3 times. You can go however many you want. And then next is lining up the timing mark I'll cover that next. But if you go past it, don't back it up. Just go around again to get back to the timing mark if you go too far. And I think that covers it. Yeah, make sure the plugs are out. Spin the engine over at least 3 times, and I went ahead and put the locks in to spin the engine over to make sure that the cams should not move. The cam shafts themselves should stay stationary while you're spinning the engine over and the cogs are spinning. So that's just to seat the timing belt and everything. Next, I'll show you how to line up the timing mark, and the one on the crankshaft that I'm going to show you is the important one. You should ignore all the other ones because they can and will be wrong if you are doing this method and you loosen these and have these spindles free spinning. Okay, and here's the mark that you align. You see the notch on the crankshaft dampener? There's a little arrow sticks out on the block, and the idea is to get that arrow lined up directly with that slit in the crankshaft dampener. And that is piston 1 at top dead center, and that is where you want it to set one of your banks. It's recommended to set the rear one first. I don't believe it would matter, but that's the recommendation. So, to set it with factory timing, you put this in to hold the cams flat, and then you torque this to I think 20 or 22 foot-pounds. Don't exceed that, because I'm sure this would break. It's from Kent Moore. So that holds the camshafts flat. And then you come around here and you use the tool that hopefully you've welded or gotten lucky and yours doesn't round. And then you torque these bolts and the sprockets to the taper mounts down to the 96 foot-pounds that it calls for. And then the timing on that bank is set. And then to do the next bank, don't set the timing on both at the same mark. You have to set one bank, and then after you get one bank set, recommended to do rear first, then you rotate the crank another full turn, 360 degrees, and do the same thing. Line up the timing marks. And then you set the other bank that you haven't sat yet. So do the rear one, and then rotate the crank 360 degrees, one full revolution, line up the timing mark again, and then set the front one the same way. Factory timing would be torque this down, holds the cam flats flat for you, and then you torque these bad boys to 96 foot-pounds. And then once you do both banks, your timing's set and you're good to go. Next, I'm going to cover the only method that I could think of to offset your timing away from factory if you want to do, say, an advance or a retard on your cam timing. There might be another way, but this is the only way I thought of, and it should work decently well. That's next. Okay, so that covered setting the timing to factory spec. Not too difficult, kind of long and involved, but not too bad as long as your tooling doesn't fail you. But if you want to go altered timing, this is the method that I thought up of. These are axle shims that have been cut down and sized to fit inside the cam carrier channel. So you can see, do your homework, decide how much offset you want to try, but just don't go too crazy because as far as 96 goes, it's not a clearance engine anymore, but if you've got a 91 to 95, I believe those are still a clearance engine. So I wanted to go 4 degrees advanced on the intake and 6 degrees retarded on the exhaust. So keep in mind that your camshafts spin at half the speed of your crankshaft, so a 3 degree advance on the camshaft is effectively 6 degrees advanced. So since I wanted to do 4 and 6 degrees, I've got these two 2 degree pieces and these two 3 degree pieces. I'm not sure to what accuracy they are, but I'm not really too concerned with it. Should be accurate enough. And if you want to do that, keep in mind also that this tool, whether it works or not, the bolt is not long enough. I tried to torque it down with the 3 degree and 2 degree on top of the cam flats, and the threads just barely touch the cam carrier threaded hole. So going to need to go to the hardware store and get a bolt that's a little bit longer, and then it should work. So basically the idea is you stick them on there and you go the direction you want. Obviously if you want to, I was going to retard the exhaust and the engine spins in this direction, so the exhaust cam needs to be offset this direction a little bit, and advance the intake, so the intake should be offset in this direction. Basically you just, I'll do an example here. So if the bolt was long enough, this will go, if I wanted to retard the exhaust, it would go like this, if you can see how it's tapered, and the bottom one on the back is the exhaust cam, and then that goes in there, and because of its taper, when you torque down the lock on top of it that's flat, that taper will angle the exhaust valve in that direction, which will be in the opposite direction of the crank rotation, which will be retarded. And then the intake will be the opposite. The larger tapered end will be up front here if you want to advance it. And I'm going to try to, see if I can get light in here. I'm going to try to hold these centered more once I get a longer bolt in there, and then once you get them torqued down, they should stay. And that's how I plan on doing offsetting my mechanical timing. I'll see how it works once I get a longer bolt, and hopefully no other important tools fail me. Okay, after I got a bolt that was 10 millimeters longer, I have them in and positioned, and here's what it looks like with the axle shims, or timing shims as I'm using them, in place. I tried to center them and get them as even as I could, just use like 2 screwdrivers and anything would work. Try to get them nice and centered and then torque it down. Then here is the front bank, how it's set up. Alright, so the next step is torquing down the taper bolts. Okay, I got my rear bank cam taper bolts torqued down, 96 foot-pounds, and this is how I had mine set up. That torque wrench barely fit, had to get it in from the bottom and wiggle it up, but I actually got them in there, and there's the modified cam holder tool that actually works after you weld some extra material in. So the rear bank's torqued, and after that you remove the holder from the rear bank, and then you spin the crank 360 degrees and realign the timing mark again. And then once you do that, torque the front 2 cams, and then remove that, and then you're good to go. You can spin the engine over a couple times and make sure it looks accurate, but obviously if you offset your timing, your cams, the flats won't be perfectly flat. Hopefully not, at least, if you altered it. And yeah, you should have, and the banks should be reversed, like whatever crankshaft position you're at. If one bank is both pointing generally up, the other one should be pointing down. The 2 banks, as far as camshafts go, should be 180 degrees separated if you've done it correctly. Okay, so everything's checked out, spun the engine over twice. It looks good. See the rear bank flats are about up with the offset that I put in, and front bank the flats are about down with my offset, so that's how it should be, 180 degrees apart. And now you're good to go with reassembly. Remember to you can put your plugs back in and tighten them now, torque them, and don't forget this bracket, a little bit of a pain, this motor mount bracket. You've got this bolt that goes into the cam carrier up here, then you've got this 10 millimeter that goes through there, and then there's one, I don't think the lighting will allow me to show you, maybe, but there's one last T50 bolt that's just back in there. Might be able to see it from the top here. But anyways, it goes through the bottom of that motor mount into the side of the head, and it's a T50 and torque it to 37 foot-pounds like the other ones. Just don't forget it, and don't get your timing cover back on, because that would be kind of annoying. Alright, just some engine-specific pointers for reassembly. Depending on how far you tore down, this may or may not be relevant, but I'll just include them here. So this lift bracket, make sure that you put that bolt in before you put the timing cover on, because you'll have to take it back off to get to it. And so in order of what I put stuff back in, lower intake was pretty much first after the heads and getting timing set and everything. And after that, make sure you get your fuel rail on, and then get your plugs in, obviously, because you can't get to them under the intake once the intake's on. And then once your plugs are in, and obviously valve cover on, make sure you pull them out and get them to where you can access them, and save the power steering pump for almost last. Get your coils in and get everything situated back there, and then make sure you plug in your injectors and get those rear injector bolts in, because you can't get to them. And then over here, this the line for your PCV valve, you can see part of it right there that connects at the back bottom of the intake plenum behind this intake arm. Make sure you get that on before the intake arm. I mean, you might be able to get to it, but it'll be a pain. And make sure you also connect your EGR, or not EGR, your oxygen sensor. That's this line right here that comes down at the back of the intake arm. Connect that, and then if you removed your vacuum lines and wiring around the intake arm, make sure to put this line that goes from the tranny up here, and it's this T-junction with two different diameters that goes into the throttle body, and then it also comes around here, and I believe it's the fuel pressure regulator, plugs into that. Run that through there, and also what's the other vacuum line? Okay, I believe that was it. And then this harness and stuff, the main wiring harness, goes to the right and on top of the intake arm. And once you get that vacuum line ran through there, and the wiring harness kind of halfway sat up and ready, then go ahead and slide the intake arm in and all of its hardware. And you can see where I got rid of my EGR. I just have a lot more space in there, so it's a little bit harder to reach if you still had an EGR. And then here's where I got rid of the throttle body coolant passage. It's just a welded plate, and so that should be it. And then I'll just do a quick overview. You should have taken a picture if you took out your vacuum lines and stuff, but if not, hopefully you can look at this and see where something goes. The left side of the engine, you can kind of figure it out. It'll mostly only fit one way, but this side, it's a little tricky and stuff's kind of twisted around. And that should do it. Alright, I did the first startup of the beast. I didn't record it because I wanted to have my hands free to bleed the coolant system and listen to stuff and check stuff. But if you have rebuilt one of these and you have fresh cam carriers and heads and everything on like I have, and the system's mostly dry, I mean, I covered my cam lobes in oil as well as I could, but it still takes a while, even with really good oil pressure, to get oil worked up to them. So I mean, it kind of freaked me out at first, but you got to just let it run, and it'll get oil up to there. But it probably took a good, I'd say, over 3 or 4 minutes before oil got up to those lifters to quiet them down. When I first started it, they were really loud, but they quieted down and everything works well. And it idles a little bit rough once it gets to operating temperature. It kind of lopes a little bit. It sounds like I've got an aftermarket cam in it, but that 4-degree advance on the intake and 6-degree retard on the exhaust was maybe a little more aggressive than I thought it'd be, so really should be interesting to get it out and see how it drives. I mean, I just thought I'd say that. If you had, like, say, new cams or something, you should probably follow a break-in procedure for those, but with these, since they were not new cams and the lifters and everything pretty much hardened already, just need to get oil to them. So yeah, make sure you have good oil pressure, but other than that, just let her run and you should be good. Okay, so here it is. Just started it, so it's pretty cold. It's still idling high at probably around 1300 RPM. It's pretty smooth right now. And it didn't tick at all when I first started it, so it's like once you get oil up to the lifters and get them pressurized, they stay pretty quiet. So yeah. Alright, so here it is at idle. Yeah, it's a pretty subtle lope, but it's there when it hits the real low RPM range. Kind of interesting. And also, don't forget and leave your clamps off when you put your thermostat back in. I did, and somehow that wasn't leaking, but I went ahead and put that clamp on. So yeah, there she is, with the offset timing and the polished parts and all that head work. And the factory air intake's next to go. I wanted to save that till I was done with the engine work, but yeah, that's not staying.